The Straight Red Card is sponsored by Roughneck Scarves. Visit Roughneck Scarves for your supporters' gear from Seattle, Portland, New York, to the Philadelphia Union, and anything MLS to the English Premier League. Visit Roughneck Scarves at roughneckscarves.com. To the Straight Red Card. Today on the show from the Houston Chronicle, we have with us Martin Hajovsky. Martin, how are things? I actually asked you this in the pre-show, so I don't know why I'm asking you again, but how are things in Houston?
I tell you, things are going well. You win 2 games in a row, and, you know, the sky is brighter, the flowers are prettier, and every woman looks great.
And the fans are a little less pissed off, probably.
Yeah, I know.
That helped. But, you know, let's start with your hometown team. Why not? The Houston Dynamo. You guys were one of the only teams that did something near closing day to add new players to the roster, and one of those new players was Je-Vaughn Watson. And I think it's fair to say that most of us don't know much about him because he's never really played club ball outside of Jamaica, but he is a Jamaican international. Can you tell us a little bit more about Je-Vaughn?
Well, you know, there's really not a whole lot to know about him just yet because that's, you know, I think the highlight of his career so far is when he scored, at the time, a go-ahead goal in Jamaica's game against Argentina last year.
Ooh.
And it was a sweet goal, too. Yeah. It's easy to find on YouTube. But he's, you know, Dynamo seem to have a line on Jamaicans these days ever since they brought in Lavelle Palmer last year, right? And Palmer, you know, established himself pretty quickly as to fill the defensive mid role. Not that last year is anything to remember, but if you were to pick up any of the few good things from last year, one of them would have been the signing of Lavelle Palmer, who was the captain at Harborview.
Right.
And Palmer was able to give them some information about some other Jamaican players, and then Dynamo actually, I think it was either Dom Kinnear or maybe it was Steve Ralston who was down scouting the Digicel Cup during the off season. And when that happened, they brought in several trialists in preseason, and one of them was Je-Vaughn Watson, who they wanted to sign during preseason, and they met with his then agent, and his agent demanded DP money and a designated player, you know, the whole thing, and that took Chris Canetti, I think, about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I guess that's his job. To stop laughing and then say no, you know, and then a few weeks had elapsed, and by that time Watson, I think, saw that the problem was not on our end. The problem was definitely on his end, and he got a different agent. And
Smart kid.
Then they contacted him. It's been back, and they finally announced his signing. And since then, since he got a different agent, he actually has been here on a trial basis and has been practicing with the team. So he should be able to slot in pretty quickly.
Get the feeling maybe his agent didn't realize we have a salary cap here?
I think that's true. I think this, you know, sounds like it was the first time he had ever made any deal with anybody, but I actually had no idea about that.
It was his uncle or something, huh?
Right, exactly. You know, at the time, I felt it was similar to, in a way, to when during the off season when MLS was working on their television rights, and after getting just awful ratings, and especially for the final, and Don Garber goes to Fox Soccer Channel and wants a 3-fold increase in the rights fees, and it was like, I'm not sure exactly what he has in mind here.
Yeah, I know. I was blown away by that as well, but
me too. I mean, just you know, the sheer stones of it all was exciting, but at the same time,
that's Garber. He's all stones and beard. Yeah,
that's doubling down with a pair of twos. You know.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we know that Jermaine Taylor didn't ask for as much money, thankfully, so he's also another Jamaican. No. Yeah. But then you had another new guy. He's a veteran of club football in Europe. He was a teammate of EJ's and Freddie Adu at Eris in Greece.
Right, he was their captain.
Yeah. Exactly, Koke, or as
Koke.
we discussed earlier, is Sergio Contreras Pardo, and then there are various ways you can scoot the word Koke in there, and that'll be how he'll be known in at Houston. But he's an offensive-minded striker, or CAM. So what's the thinking behind bringing him in that last second, and how can he help the team?
Well, I think that when he's coming in, his role, well, it's hard to say exactly which position he's going to play. Whether he's going to be a forward or central attacking mid. And if he does play central attacking mid, that brings up all sorts of questions as to where Jeff Cameron goes, and if he's playing defensive mid, where does Lavelle Palmer go? If he plays on the right, which is what he originally came up as a right mid, on the right wing, well, where does Colin Clark go, and then where does Je-Vaughn Watson play?
Yeah.
So I think it probably would produce less questions if Koke comes in immediately as a forward. And I mean, earlier in the week, he was interviewed here by Glenn Davis on the local radio, and he asking him. There were a couple of takeaways that I took from that interview, which I thought were very interesting. And he mentioned that Aris plays in a 4-4-2, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the system in which he's most comfortable, right? I thought that was very extraordinarily good news, because under Dom Kinnear, that's the system you're going to be seeing about 90% of the time, and for Dynamo. And the fact that he's not already comfortable but prefers the 4-4-2, and that he captained the team in that formation, means that he pretty much already understands what to do, where, and when. And when you compare that to, just to throw out a name, Luis Angel Landin, the previous DP signing, who was always a problem child of his previous stops, and his teams couldn't wait to get rid of him. Then here you have Koke, who who'd been there for 5 years, and the fans love him. And when you see some of the Aris fans have been on the Dynamo sites, have been other sites around, and all professing their huge love for Koke, and his final press conference announcing his exit from Aries last week, he broke down crying because of his relationship with the fans there. And that's the sort of thing that doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
And that is that was a very nice thing to see from from this angle. But the other takeaway I heard from that interview, and this is more to your question of where he's going to play, is that he doesn't really. He's not really a number 9. He's a technical player. He doesn't like a lot of passes. He plays what he said in another interview as he prefers that Spanish tiki-taka style, possession style. And but he sees himself as more of a number 10, a playmaker who distributes, right?
Yeah.
And though he loves playing on top of the attack, so he said that makes him kind of what he would call a 9.5, right? And what that brought up to me is was that the last time we had a player like that, it was Dwayne De Rosario, and Dwayne De Rosario is. I mean, it's you can go on about who's been the most important Dynamo player. I mean, it usually settles on Brian Ching at that point, but I would have always maintained that basically it was Dwayne De Rosario because of what he was able to do, what Dom Kinnear was able to do, in basically more inventing the fluidity of that position in MLS with specifically tailoring it to De Rosario back at San Jose, and then when the team came here, we haven't seen anything like that since he left. And the first year afterwards, when Stuart Holden occupied that role, Holden was very good, and it took him a little bit, about half the season, really to meld into the role, but he still, at his height, was not Dwayne De Rosario. De Rosario was perfect in that role here. And so since then, it's been hard to find somebody. Kinnear has been trying to put Jeff Cameron in that role, and who knows how that would have gone last year if he hadn't have gone down early in the season against Chicago and then not come back until September. But I personally have never seen Cameron in that role as anything other than an ongoing project.
Right. Yeah.
And so if Koke can get in there as either as a forward or as a cam, Well, I think that's an important thing. You know, I think that he really does fill the Dwayne De Rosario role.
Right.
Now, that being said, De Rosario did not play as a forward. He was forced to a few times, but he even at one point issued a press release in the middle of his final year here, saying that he is not a forward and he does not want to play forward. Through, you know, issuing that through the team.
Right.
And so if Koke comes in as a forward, then I guess Cameron would probably stay where he is if Je-Vaughn Watson doesn't.
Right.
And
do we know how much Koke? What was the signing? The dollars? Do we know that yet?
No, it was never released. But he's not a DP.
Right.
And initially, that was the first reports that he would be a DP, but he is not a DP.
Right.
So apparently, you make several deals for allocation money. Eventually, you wind up spending that money.
Yeah.
You know.
So he's probably making just under $300K, maybe. Who knows? But
right. Once the union releases the numbers later this year, then we'll know. But until then, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. But it's got to be in the. Brian Ching makes somewhere around $300,000, or whatever the league maximum is.
I was gonna say, I think three and a quarter. I think is the max.
Three and a quarter. Yeah. So I can't imagine that Koke would be making this move for anything too much less than that.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Koke, in order to get out of Aris, he bought out the last couple of years of his contract with his own money.
That's nice.
And which is interesting, seeing as how he first came to Dynamo's attention through the league office, through this Y Scout service that they have, and that he was interested in MLS, and they let and so it was the league office that tipped Dynamo that here was somebody who was eager to come over.
Yeah.
And
did he? Go ahead, Brett. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say we hear a lot of players who are interested in coming to MLS, but very few of them actually do. It's nice to actually see somebody follow up with it.
Yeah. Why did he want to come to here so bad? I mean, do we have any clue of that yet, Martin?
Well, when you look at his interviews, it's a little vague, right? I mean, what you get is that he was there at Aris for 5 years. Now, Aris has gone through, I think, 3 coaches in the last 4 months, right?
Wow.
And so when they lost in the Europa League, I think that coach was gone, and they've had not a great year. So then they had an interim, and now they've got another coach. And I think after 5 years there, I think he looking around say, you know what, if I don't leave now, then I'm not gonna leave.
Right.
Right. And he mentioned in other interviews is that he didn't want to leave, that it was time after 5 years to explore something new.
Right.
And he's 27. He's in the prime of his career, and that actually brings up a different point. Is that so many players that you hear coming over from Europe? The Greek league is certainly not one of the top leagues in Europe. But Aris is a successful team in that league,
right?
And has been successful in the Europa League and has a moderate reputation. And here's a guy who has been basically their most valuable guy for the last 4 or 5 years, who was a big scorer for his first 2 years as a forward, and then when they moved him to the cam role, his goal production went down, but the offense flowed through him a lot more.
Right.
And so the numbers don't always tell that story. But the fact that you have a guy coming over in the prime of his career to MLS and who might be set up as a very significant figure in this league.
Yeah, I mean, really, he really could be the steal, if you will, of this season because, as you mentioned, he is 27. He's not 30, and if you're sort of an attacking midfielder or you're even a striker, strikers, they can have a long life, well into their middle 30s if they're they really understand the game. So this could be a long-term success story. I mean, I'm sure you're hoping for Houston.
Oh, well, absolutely. That's the plan.
Yeah.